I had an idea for a show, but first I needed a table, a backdrop, and a host with a microphone. That's me. I'm Thomas J. Beleza, and this is Let Me Be Round With You, a show where discussions are explored through civil conversation. So I found 4 people I like and decided to see where today's topic goes in hopes we can inspire positive dialogue.
Hello, welcome to an episode of Let Me Be Round With You, a roundtable platform designed for the sole purpose to elevate society's social norms with the hope of expanding a possibility of enlightenment to our given topic. For the purpose of keeping the room civil, I will be the moderator for this subpar group of people. No, this superb gathering of people that I consider my friends and amazingly smart intellectual individuals. But as the moderator, I'll have little to no voice in the conversation at hand other than influencing the devil's advocate position to expand the flow of dialogue. Today's episode is focused on relationship dynamics. I'm Thomas J. Beleza, and I'll be your moderator for this lovely exchange. I'm joined today by 4 guests, which, by the way, I'd like to pronounce Victoria McGinnis, Natalie G. Seagrift, Kenny Murdoch, and Paul LaPlaca. Let's hear a little bit about each person. Tell me a little bit about yourself, Victoria, and then we'll go on to Natalie, Kenny, and Paul. Go ahead, Victoria.
Sure, of course. So my name is Victoria McGinnis. I am an actress, and I also really love to dance. My specialty is belly dancing.
Natalie, tell us a little about yourself and your cat.
My tiger who's trying to get out of the room. My name's Natalie Seagriff. I am an architect and a mom, and I have 2 beautiful children and some furry ones too.
I want that cat. Kenny, who are you? What do you do?
My name's Kenny Murdoch. I'm a writer in the greater New York City area and the lower Detroit area on the weekends. I just like kicking back, hanging out, writing. That's really all I do.
Okay. And Mr. Paul LaPlaca.
I'm a sound engineer, producer, multi-instrumentalist, and I have my own radio show, 6 Degrees with Paul LaPlaca on Pure Rock Radio on Tuesday nights.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being a guest on this show. I'd like to start off, though, today's position of the episode. We're asking questions to understand what is a relationship dynamic. I like to define that, though. What is a relationship and the dynamics in which we relate or place upon such relationships? To begin, I'll set the stage by defining what a relationship dynamic is for this episode. A relationship dynamic is an interpersonal relationship which refers to the association, connection, interaction, and bond between 2 or more people. Obviously, today our guests can counter that and contradict it in any way they want, but ultimately that is my position and what the show's position on relationship dynamic is. Now, there are 4 variations of any given relationship, and I'll present those, and then we'll take it from there. A family member or family relationship, a friendship relationship, acquaintances, and romantic. Family are people we are born into knowing, they're blood related. Friendships are ultimately bonded through strangers turning into somebody that we understand and know. Acquaintances are people we know, but we don't necessarily put a lot of time into hang out with. Like, for example, people we work with might be an acquaintance, but not necessarily our friends. And romantic is usually intimate. However, in this discussion, you will hear that we will talk how friendships can be highly intimate without sexual contact. I like to start it off already. So there are boundaries to all relationships. What you need from a relationship, what you're willing to allow, and what ends a relationship. I'd like to start off with Victoria. Do these ideas refer to all forms of relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think so. I think that if you have a core, solid kind of like moral compass, depending on your own set of belief systems, then yeah, I do think it relates to every single type of relationship you could have.
Right. That's true. Relationships in themselves, it doesn't matter if it's family, friendship, or acquaintance, romances, you definitely need to have self-boundaries. However, are there boundaries, I'll throw this back to the table, are there boundaries that you're willing to deal with that are maybe touching against your boundaries and or maybe making you turn your boundaries that you had into something new, like evolving you? Let's go to Paul.
I think if you have boundaries in place for any relationship, you are establishing what you need to function within that relationship. So if you get challenged on those boundaries and you feel comfortable enough that they help you to grow, it's good to be flexible with them. But in other situations, it's important to maintain those boundaries to establish some respect in that relationship, because I've certainly from personal experience had people push those boundaries, and you have to establish really solidly that that's not acceptable for this relationship to work. Here's the fence, and you can't cross,
Very good. And has there ever been a situation where you were willing to have a little pushback that altered some of your perspectives on your boundaries, allowing you to ultimately grow as a person and see a position that you normally would have been against originally, but found somebody that put it into perspective? Let's talk to Natalie on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those things get challenged all the time. There's a certain push and pull that happens in every relationship. So some boundaries are more flexible than others, right? And I think that there are lines that can't be crossed, because what you tolerate, you permit, right? But I also think that it's an opportunity for reflection on what you value and who you are as a person.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good point to all these conversations. Now we're agreeing with these subjects. So I'd like to point out, do these boundaries that we have, are they leveled at different degrees, depending on if it's a family, friendship, acquaintance, or a romantic partnership? With that said, I'd like to hear Kenny's output on this or input.
I'm like super happy that I'm on this portion, because that's one of the things I was thinking even initially when you said it, is depending on what we're doing is, well, speaking as somebody who has trouble establishing boundaries, crossing boundaries, respecting boundaries, it's a really good question. Because if we're just friends, I'm definitely not going to tolerate the same from you as I would from, say, somebody that I'm, that I'm madly in love with. Like, I'm just not going to do it. Same thing with an acquaintance. I feel like the fuse is shorter and shorter for when I'm going to blow you up and cut you out of my life. Like you said, depending on the varying degrees of what our relationship is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to family, friends, or a romance, or just somebody you kind of know, yeah, you definitely have to hold stronger to your boundaries. And with that said, how often do you speak to somebody in a family, friendship, acquaintance, romance, in any situation? How often do you speak to somebody openly about your boundaries? And when do you bring up such a subject to any person from any form of conversation? Let's just talk to Victoria on this.
Can you just repeat it one more time?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Basically, what I'm asking is, if you have boundaries, when do you approach somebody with these boundaries to let them know what they are? Or do you wait till moments come up and you say, you know what, you're upsetting my boundary? However, in that situation, my devil's advocate, my counter to that is, it's not their responsibility to know what your boundaries are. And therefore, I personally feel they are not necessarily at fault for crossing a boundary that has not necessarily been had a conversation about. So my question ultimately is, how often do you speak with a person about your boundaries? And when do you bring such a subject up with any form of relationship?
Well, with all my relationships, I'm very forthright. At least from my own personal experiences, because as you get older and as you experience more, you kind of learn what your boundaries are. Some haven't even been discovered yet. So I tend to be very forthright. If there's a moment within a moment, I will bring it up. So I try not to let things stew, because when they do stew, problems arise. So I would rather just kind of like diffuse the situation and make it something that can be logically kind of worked with.
All right. So to that point, what you're saying is, if somebody starts doing something closely to the boundary, you'll bring it up and suggest, hey, just so you know, This thing affects me in a certain way. Now, I'm going to throw this to Paul. Now, Paul, as a counter to that, to her position, do you feel it would be wiser or to bring it up way before there is a connection to hitting that pinnacle? Or do you feel she's on the right path to allow it to kind of come up organically and stop it as it's happening?
I think with any relationship that you enter into, there is an unspoken kind of agreement and a template to that type of relationship that most healthy people recognize where standard boundaries are. And it's when you start dealing with people that aren't mentally healthy, that don't understand the boundaries, that's when you have to kind of solidify them when they cross or approach boundaries. And those boundaries are shifting depending on if the relationship is transactional, and it's like, listen, if you do X, then the result of that is Y, and if you cross that boundary, then that balance shifts, and then the transactional part of it, you don't get the same from me as you would if you respected the boundary. So I feel like it's like you shouldn't have to, in most situations, establish boundaries. The boundaries are established by the type of relationship you agree to be in with that person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that though, if you are presenting the idea that, and just so I'm clear, you're presenting the idea that if I say choose to be in a relationship with somebody, and we say we're going to be monogamous and this is romantic, I am to assume that they understand the general respecting position of that relationship without actually having a diverse conversation. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think so. Anytime I've had a romantic relationship go from the friend dating stage to the monogamous stage, there's always been that conversation of, hey, I'm really into you and I want you to be my partner, my boyfriend, my girlfriend. Most people don't, it isn't ambiguous when you cross that line. It's like a week or two of that relationship where you're like, are we dating now? And you kind of establish like, okay, it's just me and you, right? We're done with, with my girlfriend, it was like, it happened within the first 5 minutes of having a conversation. We were like, it was like, okay, we're not going to mess around. We're too old to play games. We're dating now. Nobody else. And it's like, yeah, I think you have to establish it in some way if you want that relationship to be monogamous. There needs to be some flag that you put in the sand and establish it.
Now, even with monogamy, there has to be a variation on the format. Some people, when we're talking about boundaries, we're not just talking about sleeping with no one else but our significant others. There are boundaries that we need as individuals, and if joining a relationship like a monogamous relationship, to assume they know our boundaries and vice versa could potentially cause miscommunication, a convoluted interest in the journey of a relationship. Natalie, what are your thoughts ultimately on maintaining silence with that assumption to them believing what you believe without bringing it up until basically the moment it happens? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's interesting because I think there are two different types of boundaries, right? You have the boundaries that are established with the label of the relationship, which is assumed, pretty well known, right? But then you also have boundaries within that. Like, for example, if I like my space, even if I'm in a monogamous relationship, but I like to have my alone time, to just assume that my partner's going to know that, especially in the beginning, it's, I don't know. I think that's something that maybe needs to be either made clear verbally, mm-hmm. In a respectful way, or there becomes a kind of a dance of figuring out, okay, I like my space, but he really likes to be around me a lot. How do I convey to him in a way that maybe isn't so direct, but won't hurt his feelings? It just depends, I think. But I think number one, there always has to be respect to the communication. I mean, that's just mm-hmm. obvious. But so I think that's where it becomes kind of cloudy, is that you have those boundaries of, that are products of how you grew up and how your personality is and just how you're wired, right? It's the same thing with, I think, parent-child relationships or work relationships, or even those different levels of friendships, which you have your really close, intimate friends, people that you will share everything and anything with. And then you have some that you're not really sure what those lines are. It's a little bit more ambiguous. So I don't know if I answered that really concisely, but.
You answered what you had to answer. There's
Yeah.
no right or wrong answer. I mean, that was wrong, but no, just kidding. Moving to Kenny. No, it was a great perspective. Let's go to Kenny with the 3 C's of any strong relationship as per psychological studies on how to bring a strong foundation to a relationship. It comes down to communication, compromise, and commitment. I'd like to present those 3 with at least definitions. Communication, is there such thing as too much communication? Kenny?
Oh, there is 1000% too much too much communication. Absolutely. That's my last relationship to a T. It just seemed like every day a new boundary was being created or something was being discussed about that we didn't like that the other person did. And it really did. It became almost a full-time job. It was expected, even no matter how good of a day we had. By the end of the day, we were going to do something that pushed the other one's buttons, and we were going to have a discussion about it. And I guess that came into a lot of like compromise. Like with me, I compromise a lot. I feel like in my waking life, when it comes to my feelings or somebody else's feelings, I think I'm very, very good at compromising. My last relationship, I was with a person who was not very good at compromising. It was basically just like, well, I presented you my wants, my needs, my non-negotiables. But after a while, it just seemed like everything was a non-negotiable. So it was like, well, and Natalie had brought up a great point too with space. She was a person who loved her space. I am not a person who needs that space. To me, it was very strange going 5-6 days without seeing somebody and being totally fine with that. So as far as too much communication, yeah, because after a while, it kind of just feels like you're talking about everything negative and never anything positive. Yeah.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about compromise too. Sometimes when you're communicating, there's a point. Are you communicating your feelings, or are you just having a good conversation that's allowing you to communicate ultimately direction in where you want to be in the relationship? And when it comes to the compromise, the position I'm going to present to the table is, when is a compromise more than a compromise? When to me, I believe a compromise should be about the small things, things that don't necessarily change your identity. If you're compromising who you are as a person, your essence, your soul, your ideals, your morals, I believe those might, for the debate aspect, those might be taking the compromise to a step too far. Whereas, do you want to go to this movie or that movie? Those are easy compromises, right? But now, if you deny the identity compromise, are you not caring enough for that relationship? I'm gonna give this back to Victoria. Victoria, have you ever been in a situation? Well, let's just put it this way. I'm not gonna put you on the table like that, but
you can.
What about the compromises? Would you agree with what I'm saying, where there's 2 different forms of compromise? There's identity compromise, and then there's
Absolutely. That's always been like one of my big things too, is, I tend to be very, at least how I would see myself, I think I'm a very solid person personally. And I kind of like know who I am. And there are just some things that I wouldn't tolerate in a relationship, in regards to, like changing myself as a person. When I was younger, I kind of did that a little bit, to suit the wants and needs of my partner. But as I got older, I realized I was so unhappy and miserable in those relationships because I wasn't being true to who I am. So in regards to compromising, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that being who you are, you kind of need to establish those particular, as we were saying before, boundaries with the person in the beginning. Like, I think it's the best idea to put everything out on the table and be like, this is who I am. These are my goals. This is part of what I want in life. And if you want to join me on that ride, then let's go, but if you can't appreciate certain things about me, then, got to part our ways. It's just, and I think that's very important to kind of honor yourself. It's about honor.
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt. There are times when you hear about relationships where the people are like, yeah, you know what I loved about them? I love that they were funny, outgoing, they talked to everyone, they had confidence. And then like a year later, like, I can't stand how outgoing they are. They talk to everyone, they have and you're like, but that's who I am. Like, how?
Exactly. I've been there before. I'm with you.
Yeah, it's just it's inappropriate behavior in my opinion. To be like, I accept you, but now everything about you is
it's
terrible.
Controlling behavior.
Yeah, and we like to flush that down the toilet.
Yeah.
But now when it comes to commitment, there are different variations of commitment. Obviously there's monogamy, there's marriage, there's a domestic partnership, there's swinging, there's platonic love, polyamory, open relationships, polyfidelity, which is ultimately it's multiple people just staying within that group. So 3 or 4 people together, they're just together with each other. They don't really go to anyone else outside. There's closed relationships also, which is, if anyone doesn't know what a closed relationship is, just so they understand the definition, it's basically falling in love with more than one person, but keeping to only being sexual with one partner. Meaning that you find intimacy and love with other people and you experience life, but you don't give them the sexual connection, right? Now, when it comes to commitment, earlier Paul was saying that, when you join a relationship and it's monogamous, you're saying that you're not sleeping with anyone and I'm not going to sleep with anyone else. And that's just something that's sort of a silent agreement. Now, this is where I feel I have to disagree. Not everyone comes into a monogamous relationship with the same ideals. Monogamy might mean that I'm going to give you my loyalty of love. I'm going to give you my time. I want to grow with you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're interested in one sexual partner. Does that mean it's no longer monogamous? Well, monogamy by definition is that you're staying sexual with one partner. But without that real conversation, they might not see monogamy as the definition. Not everyone is well versed in, the English lexicon where they're just like, well, I know what the definition is. But that's the thing about the human brain, is that we are isolated to our own understandings, and without that communication to join those relationships, we might be in a different situation. So I want to throw to the table the aspect of commitment. How often have you had a conversation with somebody about commitment and what that means to you? And could you be committed to somebody emotionally, knowing that there's a chance that both of you might not necessarily be dedicated to each other? We're going to let Kenny talk about this.
Yeah, I guess that goes again into a personal preference. So I guess I know personally for me, no. Like I couldn't be with somebody who sexually wanted to be with somebody else. At that point, it's probably self-admittedly like an ego thing, I guess. It's like you're definitely not going to be with somebody who could potentially do the things to you that I do in bed. But also it's a double standard. I wouldn't want to do that with anybody else in as far as in bed goes. But like I said, I know it's an age thing, and I know it's I know tons of people who thought about like me for the longest time, and then one day they just woke up and they were like, who cares? And they're like, whatever, dude. She comes home to me at night. It's not a big deal. We do our own thing. But yeah, for me personally, no. Monogamy to me is one. So if we're sharing intimate things, I don't think you should be sharing them intimately with somebody else. To me, it's like what makes us special then, like anybody can make you laugh. Anybody can, cook your favorite dinner. Anybody can, and make you come really hard. The thing I like about a relationship is that I'm the one who makes you laugh the hardest. I'm the one who cooks your dinner the best, and I'm the one that makes you come the hardest. Like that's to me, again, personally. Yeah, I feel monogamy is between 2 people, one each.
All right. Now, that's a good perspective on it. And I like to just point out there are times when people court, and they'll court multiple partners, the dating aspect of it, and I use court because I'm old. Courting, is ultimately, just suiting somebody. And but on top of that, sometimes, and you hear it often, people are like, well, I'm just dating. I'm checking out the scene. So to that mentality of what Kenny is saying, where he's like, I don't want anyone else being the person that does what I can give to them. However, in a dating scene, why is dating different than, say, having a monogamous relationship? Whereas with dating, I could be sexual with multiple people. I could be intimate with multiple people. I could experience multiple things. Is it the justification of self where you're like, well, I'm just trying out the field? Natalie, have you ever been in both of those situations where you were dating and it was multiple partners, and then you were like, all right, this is the person I'm going to pick? And if you don't want to answer that directly, what about that subject matter? What are your thoughts on dating and being intimate with others and then choosing to be monogamous?
I actually have never been in that situation. Honestly, because for me, if I'm interested in somebody, I'm really only focused on that person, and that's just how I'm wired. Now, some people can do the dating multiple people at the same time, and I think that's fine as long as it's clear to both parties. Or, if you're one person, you're dating three people, as long as those three people are in the same understanding that that's what's happening, it's fine. Right? And everyone's being safe and consensual and all that stuff. But I've personally have never been comfortable with the idea, just because I don't think it's really fair to not put 100% of you into somebody else in terms of seeing if that's really going to work. Right? If your attention's divided among three different people, or four different people, or two even, it's kind of like, well, are you really giving it a shot? Are you giving it an honest effort? So for me personally, I think that is, I'm just not wired to feel, think that way or operate that way. But at the same time, if everyone's of the same understanding, I don't really see an issue with it. I think it becomes difficult when someone is dating multiple people, and then maybe someone's attachment to that person starts to grow and it's not mutual, and the expectations are different, then I think it becomes a bit hairy. And then, at what point are you stringing someone along, or, something like that? But again, it comes down to communication and being honest, just being honest with the other person, or people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Communication is the key to any situation. And but again, as we said earlier, too much communication could overwhelm a person. But the right amount of communication, the right honesty, definitely can guide and transcend those kind of relationships. Now, when it comes to multiple dating, there's also a thing called polyamory. Polyamory is basically about having multiple loving relationships. They don't necessarily have to be sexual, but you can be with somebody and then have somebody else, and they could have somebody else, and it could just be a sense of communication that allows love to kind of grow amongst these three people, which is ultimately the opposite of monogamy. Now, I'd like to end the show basically with this discussion, and I'll let everybody have a little shot at it. When it comes to monogamy, polyamory, multiple people, it's the idea that I hear often with discussions like, well, what if somebody loves somebody more, or like there's jealousy, or like they're getting more attention than I'm getting, or all these other things, and you have to think about love for individuals the same way you think about love for your friends, love for your family, love for your children. There's is there a sense of like, if a parent has two kids, and let's say they're absolutely twins, and you say, I love you to one kid, does that mean you love the other kid less, more? How does that work, right? So, the idea that is always thrown on the table for polyamory is like, well, if you love somebody, won't somebody else feel like they're not as loved? And it's like, the definition of love is a collection of feelings dedicated to that one person. Their love and the love for that person, it has nothing to do with the love for that person. Could you like someone more or less? Yeah, that comes down to attitude. If they're not fun to be around, you're not going to like them as much as the person that's, obviously, let's go to the carnival. But with that said, I want to throw it to the table the idea that, when it comes to polyamory, is there, does it make sense that the idea of loving more than one person, does that relate to the concept that, well, I can love more than one child, and I could love more than one parent, and I could love more than one friend? Does that degrade or devalue the love I have for any one person? Let's start with Kenny, and then we'll go to Natalie, Paul, and we'll end on Victoria.
I don't think it degrades any love, but just like there's any relationship, there's layers to the relationships in general. Like there has to be layers to the love. I just think it's very interesting that we started a topic about dynamic relationships, and it seems that the toughest one is a sexual relationship. You know, with my mom, I could just be like, all right, I'm going to leave. With my friends, I could be like, all right, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. But with somebody you really, really love, that's when the boundaries seem to get stretched, and that's when everything seems to get really convoluted. But speaking to polyamory and things like that, it's just something I don't understand. It's not a concept I follow. It's people try to explain it to me, and it just seems to me like, yeah, there's enough love to go around. But, you know, speaking back to my last point, what makes me the special one? I don't want to be part of a plug and play piece, a Voltron of your heart. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, you know, Kenny's the head because he keeps my head on my shoulders, or Kenny's the arm because he's always there to hold me close. Like I want to be the whole Mighty Morphin Zord for you. So like when Craig makes up your intimacy and Kyle makes up your funny stuff, it's like, what are you coming home to me for? Should we just get a condo with 5 bedrooms and everybody live here? Like where's what I don't personally understand the levels of the love to polyamory. So when you tell me, you know, I love you like this, but I love this person the same way, it's like it's even hard for me to have this discussion because I couldn't even fathom loving someone so much. And I'm like, all right, you know what? You know, go get dick down and have some laughs with that other dude, you know? So I don't just personally understand the levels to the love. So I'm sorry, I really can't give a better, you know, talking point to it.
That's okay. That was a great talking point. And, you know, to kind of clarify what Kenny's saying and to bring a counter to that, you know, ultimately it's not saying I love this person this much or this way and I love you this way. And it's our love is our love and our love is our love. But that goes to friendships too. You know, you know, how can you love a friend and then love another friend? How is it possible? You know, and the idea is that one friend gives you a certain satisfaction in life to qualities. Maybe they like for example, you know, let's just throw cosplay out there. Maybe one friend is a huge cosplay person and your best friend doesn't necessarily like cosplay, but you enjoy doing cosplay. So you have this other friend you can enjoy that side of your life with. Whereas your best friend, you enjoy, you know, going for hikes. But your cosplay friend's like, hike, yeah, I'm exhausted even thinking about it. So to your argument, that's ultimately what being in a poly would be. It's not necessarily that someone is better than the other person. It's like a friendship. The only difference is you're adding a sexual aspect to it. You know, because you can fall in love with a friend, but not necessarily be like, I want to take a shower with this person, right? But with everything Kenny said and everything we've been talking about, let's throw it to Natalie and, you know, add your thoughts, maybe even counter what we were saying, or ultimately just talk about what you got when it comes to polyamory.
I also think it depends on what your definition of love is or how you experience love growing up, right? But ultimately, for me, what love is if you're loving someone unconditionally, there's no expectation of a return, which is very difficult to do because we all have egos, right? I mean, everyone has an ego. You can say you don't have an ego and you're lying to yourself. You have an ego. So that's where I think it becomes very difficult when you have the polyamory, right? Because jealousy is going to come in. It's that whole dynamic between people. So in people who are in those sorts of relationship, if there's a full understanding of what's happening, you know, where they are intimate with all those people and it's all, you know, intertwined like that, then, you know, fine. I personally could not do that, but you know, to Tom's point about, you know, you have a friend that you go do this with, or you have a friend that you go do that with, and they fulfill certain things for you. I think that's also part of the ego, which isn't necessarily bad either, but it's just that, you know, you go and enjoy those things with that person because that makes you feel good, sort of thing. So it's just my 2 cents.
Well, yeah, no, you know, to that, in any strong relationship, you also have to have a self of identity. You have to have a sense of self and identity to that self. In fact, most strong relationships learn that there are things I need to do to make me feel full, and there are things you need to do to make you feel full. And just because I like pottery doesn't mean we both have to do pottery. And that's the concept of, you like cosplay, you like hiking. You don't necessarily have to do everything with somebody that you are, let's say, deeply and madly in love with. That's why we have friends. And, you know, friendship can create the jealousy too. You know, you always go to the movies with so-and-so. You know, how come we don't go to movies? Well, you talk through the whole movie and you always hate the movies that we see. I like to experience the cinema. Does that mean you love them any less? You know, because you want to enjoy a movie with somebody who enjoys movies instead of just feeling like they're there and they're just sucking the life out of that experience, you know. But let's go to Paul. Paul, to everything that's been said, including the conversation at hand, why don't we hear some of your thoughts?
For polyamory, for me, my personal experience with it, my ex, you know, towards the end of our relationship, decided that she wanted to explore polyamory. And, you know, it's like that's way late in the game to start changing the rules. And my sense of it was, okay, this is an opportunity to be lazy about your primary relationship when you don't even have enough to love your primary partner to start introducing other partners and call it polyamory. In my situation, was laughable. So that's my only experience with it. I don't feel in the need to explore that myself. There's no interest in that because, you know, kind of as a metaphor or, you know, a simile that my choice to be a parent, I only have enough time and financial resources to dedicate to one child. So I made the choice in my life to only have one child because of my position and where I am in life. I want to be able to give that one relationship the most focus and attention and energy that I can. So similarly, you know, with a romantic relationship and monogamy, it's like, I only have enough in me for one woman. I don't have any other time, money, or energy or resources to take on another relationship. So polyamory to me doesn't make any sense for me. If somebody else can pull it off and that works for their life, God bless them. And I have no problem with other people doing it. I just don't think it's really feasible for most people. I don't understand how anyone has time for more than one serious relationship. It's just like, if you're doing it right, that relationship takes up all your focus, all your energy. You don't have time to have two lovers and two relationships. In my mind, in my heart, I don't think it's feasible.
And, you know, those are good points to bring up. And as a counter, you know, does that mean that your love and appreciation and dedication to your child, does that outweigh your appreciation and love and dedication to a full-on single relationship with another woman? And, you know, now we're getting into like, well, who gets the most time? And, you know, one is blood, right? You know,
that I would say, and my partner, my girlfriend understands, it's not about who loves someone more, but where my responsibility is. She understands that my responsibility, my duty is to my child first. I am responsible for him. I'm not responsible for her. So there's a different level of priority in that sense, but it's not a question of measuring love at that point. It's like, you can't really quantify and measure who do you love more, but the child is my responsibility. So that's where a priority, a choice will have to be made at some point. You know, who do I serve in that situation? Who am I responsible for?
Yeah. And, you know, now you could just throw in, well, what if you both were the parent of that child, you know, both blood. Now, who do you, well, we're both responsible for the kid, but one person in the relationship was like, yeah, but all we do is spend time with the kid. What about us? Where's our time? How come we can't go on dates? Well, we're not financially secure to have somebody watch the child and all these other things. And now, you know, but does that mean there's a diminishing aspect of that relationship? However, I do want to move on. And, you know, you did bring up a really great aspect of polyamory, especially from, you know, a more negative, you know, like a negative experience of it, which is possible. And it sounds like, you started as monogamous, and then as an idea, let's try polyamory. And I agree with you 100%. In that situation, it sounded like there wasn't enough understanding of the initial relationship, as you called it, a primary, which is known as a hierarchy polyamory. There are different variations of polyamory where it's hierarchy, and then but you ultimately just kind of jumped into the idea. And polyamory, if you don't have the mindset for it, it's the same thing. There's a theory people are born with the emotional understanding of polyamory, just like some people are born homosexual or trans or whatever. It's something that's just innate in the being of the person. So it's not necessarily like, let's be poly. It's sort of like, well, why? I don't understand why I have to be with one person. So there is that school of argument too. With all that said, let's go to Victoria to end the show. Why don't you give us your thoughts on everything that's been said up to this point?
Well, this happens to be one of my favorite topics. Since I could remember, I've always been very interested in the concept of love and how each love that you have with every different person is so different. So when it comes to polyamory, I kind of think about the 8 love types, the 8 Greek love types. So I think about those kind of things, and in regards to polyamory, for myself, I'm not particularly I like to focus all my sexual energy on one. Just because when I focus really hard on one thing, whether it's a mental focus, a physical focus, or an intellectual focus, that particular thing grows faster, right? So my knowledge of a certain topic will grow faster. Or if I'm with one person, that relationship actually moves faster and it actually grows better because I'm kind of watering it. I'm consistently watering that one plant. So for myself, polyamory has never quite worked. I have been the type who has dated several people at once, not seriously, but trying to see if maybe polyamory would work with me, or if I'm just more monogamous. You kind of got to work those things out for yourself. But I just kind of look at it as everyone should have the right to live the way that they want, as long as they're not hurting anybody, and as long as there are boundaries, as we spoke about earlier on in the conversation. As long as there are boundaries set in place and everybody knows what is working for them and what doesn't work for them, then it doesn't really matter, because love is always love, no matter what kind of love it is. So as others have said before, love of children, love of family, love of, if you're religious, love of God, love of the universe, there's a lot to work with. So I think that people who are polyamorous just have a lot of love and they want to just share it. And there's nothing particularly wrong with that. I have a lot of love for my friends. I have a lot of love for my family. It's just, everything's different with everybody. I can't imagine love being the same between any two people. And I think it also comes down to love of self as well. You are who you are, and you should honor your belief system, and you should honor what feels good to you, obviously, as long as nobody's getting hurt. So that's kind of my take on that, I guess.
That was a great take. And, I want to thank everyone for being on this episode of Let Me Be Round with you. Everyone had a really wonderful perspective on a lot of these topics. I appreciated the open conversation and dialogue to how dynamic relationships really affect us. I know we mostly focused on romantic relationships, so maybe there'll be another day when we can get together and discuss relationships just in general, friends and family and things like that. However, I thought this was a very encouraging and educational conversation. Now, as far as everybody that's in this table, you'll be able to check them out. There'll be websites and links within the description of this episode. So please check those out, give them a little look-see and see what they're doing. Again, a huge shout out to everybody: Victoria McGinnis, Paula Baca, Natalie Seagriff, and of course, the infamous Kenny Murdoch, who I love everybody that came on today. Thank you again, and look forward to another episode of Let Me Be Round with You.